Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Professor Gandhi.
Thank you very much for a generous welcome. I'd like to say to all present that it is a great honor to be in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. A great joy to be with everyone connected in Moravian College. And a pleasure to be responding to the invitation from Dr. Arup Sengupta to give the Rabindranath Tagore Distinguished Lecture of this year. I sincerely hope I deserve the affection that I have received and the honor that has come my way today. Tagore and Gandhi, light in the midst of darkness. Being a light in the midst of darkness is in nature the work of celestial phenomena. Celestial phenomena play that role now, not just through natural sky beings like clouds and mist and fog, but new intruders, visible and invisible, thick masses of pollutants in colors and odors unknown to humanity until recently, all but obscure them from view. Sometimes we can see them through nitrogen dioxide and sulfur dioxide gases pumped into the air by the combustion of fossil fuels, carbon monoxide from industrial and transport emissions, chemical toxins from what we grow and how we grow it, methane from what we throw and how we throw it and where we throw it. And when we do, those nighttime celestials are a miracle and a blessing. In the past, they did more than bless. The moon, stars, comets, and meteors for millennia lit the paths of travelers and navigators. The three magi from the east would not have got to the manger in the Bethlehem of Judea. And no stars, your guest speaker of today from India, from the east, would not have made it to this Bethlehem of the USA as easily as he has. 57 stars, I was astonished to learn. 57 stars are known to aid air navigators worldwide even today. But starlight, it must be said, helps only when star watchers help starlight to help. Stars were ready to guide Columbus. If he had heeded their signal and reached his destination, which was India, a very different person would have been speaking to you today. And to a very different audience, you, which in most part might well have descended from families such as that of the great Chief Walking Buffalo. That wonderful man had a sense of humor and of history. He once told a group of visitors from my India, the Republic of India, Walking Buffalo said, "Hey, we are stony Indians, you are phony Indians." Now they knew their stars, stony Indians did. They knew the value of light in darkness. They helped it to help them. A very old star chart discovered a few years ago shows sophisticated stargazing and star mapping by the Skiddy band of Pawnee Indians. And Grady Winston tells us that they attributed human-like qualities to the twinkling objects in the sky. The great nursery rhyme, I call it great. Nursery rhymes can be great. Twinkle, twinkle is celebrated principally for one couplet. You can all guess it. Up above the world so high, like a diamond in the sky. That image has made the lullaby world famous. But so bright is that sky-high diamond sparkle that it has typically obscured the rest of the lullaby and has left the song's creator, the English poet Jane Taylor, in the dark of unknowing. A common hazard with creators from the beginning of creation is that the creator is forgotten. Now, is that work, Twinkle, Twinkle, Little Star, a song to light, or is it a song to the dark? Very difficult to say. As difficult as it was for me when a girl asked me the question. Tell me, she said, is the world a good place or a bad place? If I had told her in the bloom of her life what I was instinctively minded to do, namely that it is not a good, in fact, very often it is a very bad place, I would have been guilty of violence, of assaulting hope, of betraying beauty, of letting happiness down. But if I had told her that the world is a very good place, in fact a particularly good place, I would have been sinning against the light of honesty. But if I had said the third thing, look, it is a bit of both, good and bad, bad now, good now, bit in turns, I would not have helped her at all. So I said what all philosophy tries: substitute possibility for certainty, hypothesis for thesis, and turn to other people's ideas and quotations to strengthen one's own weak thoughts. So is Twinkle, Twinkle a song to light or to the dark? The convenient answer would be, it is a song to both. The philosophic escape would be to say, like life itself, the song is about finding light in the dark, and turn to Mozart. The creator of Requiem had nearly lost his sight as a child and is believed to have contributed from the darkness he went through to the redemptive tuning of Twinkle, Twinkle. Now, it is no rhyme-chime thing, that lullaby. It is a deeply philosophical testimony to astronomical time. Its greatest lines are not like a diamond in the sky. Its greatest lines are, when the blazing sun is gone, when he nothing shines upon, then you show your little light. Twinkle, twinkle, all the night. Then the traveler in the dark thanks you for your tiny spark. He could not see which way to go if you did not twinkle so. We are all, in one way or another, travelers in the dark of unseeing physically and mentally, the dark of doubt, of despair, of suspicion, of fear, the dark of being in a mental here, there, and everywhere, kind of nowhereness. We would not see, as Jane Taylor says, which way to go if some light, some spark did not show us the way to go. And now, in our smog-laden times, lights showing the way are few, and we seem to be getting used to darkness of various kinds around us and to a lot within us. Taylor, who died at the age of 40 of breast cancer, has another poem almost unknown, called The Violet, which is about the darkness within. It has these lines: "Down in a green and shady bed, a modest violet grew. Its stalk was bent, it hung its head as if to hide from view." Now, darkness is about the mind. It is about doubt, about grief, about dismay and disappointment. And depression is in its own way very dark. All these states of mind, which are really states of being, are real, out in the open, in the daylight of felt experience. "Oh, dark, dark, dark," said John Milton, "sight denied, light denied. Amid the blaze of noon, irrecoverably dark, total eclipse, without all hope of day." Depression, clinical depression, as it is sometimes called clinically, is also about being in a kind of darkness. And so thank you, Jane Taylor, for being the star that you are. But in the modern world, however, post Thomas Alva Edison, being light in the darkness means something very simple, very unphilosophical. Today, being a light in the midst of darkness would mean being electric bulbs, tubes and torches, and also cellular phones with their multitasking backlit screens. If the main lights were to go off in this hall post-Edison, my lecture title, "Light in the Midst of Darkness," would mean only one thing. It would mean all your cell phone lights. But at the level of elevated and metaphorical speech, being a light is the attribute of enlightened souls. Gautama the Buddha is called the enlightened one. When at age 80, he lay dying in Kushinara, in what is now the Indian state of Uttar Pradesh, his disciple Ananda stood in the dark of grief. "Who will we look up to now?" Ananda asked in fear and trembling. The Buddha, turning to his disciples' tear-filled eyes, said, "Apadipo bhava," be a light, deeper, unto yourself, which meant seek no external support. So does that mean that we must not let stars or any light support us? Not so. The enlightened ones help a fear-filled humanity see its way through dark times, but without creating a dependency. Light is no colonizer, no imperium. It is simply there in the firmament of life, as is the dark. Light and dark are not enemies. They are neighbors. Humans make neighbors enemies. God or nature or some bang, big or small, which made the light, made the dark as well. And that which has given us both has not given us both to love the one and fight the other, but to see what may be the purpose of both working in unison or separately. The Holy Quran tells us that it is He who ordained the stars for you, that you may be guided thereby in the darkness of the land and sea. A great Indian lived like a light in and through darkness. She regarded herself an Indian, though she was born in Macedonia. "If I ever become a saint," she famously said, "I will surely be one of darkness." I like to think of Saint Teresa as Mother Teresa. Malcolm Muggeridge, the British author and journalist, has told us how when his cameraman, the great Ken Macmillan, went to film her in Calcutta's Home for the Dying. Many of you may have visited Kalighat, which is very dark and dank and has virtually no lighting. He, at first up, gave up. Macmillan said, "I can't do this, there is no light." And I quote Ian Hunter in the Globe and Mail. By any natural explanation, this part of the film should have been a failure. Instead, as anyone who can see it can attest, it is bathed in an unearthly lambent illumination less light than a glow. Mr. Muggeridge was convinced that this was the first and perhaps the only miracle recorded by television. Macmillan was not just filming in darkness, he was actually filming darkness. Mother Teresa and darkness were one and the same. They lit one another. When they see she was a miracle worker, when they say she healed miraculously, that her miracles made her a saint, I am impressed. Anyone would be. But when I hear her say, with scowling honesty, as she did in 1953 to Archbishop Perrier, she said, there is such terrible darkness within me, then I'm more than impressed. I'm awed. That statement of hers, that there is darkness within me, is lit by utter honesty. Can there be anything more honest, more human, than the words of doubt, of being bereft, of being let down, expressed by one who is seen as the very personification of faith? The most moving words from Jesus, Son of Mary, are from his blinding pain on the cross, addressed to God. Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani. My God, God, why have you forsaken me? And then to his mother, what can only be said by a child to its mother, as any mother would know. He said, I thirst. Mother Teresa made the darkness of her doubt level with the light of her faith. She made it as high or as low, as bright or as dim as light. She made darkness share the same space as light. She made darkness the envy of light. The great goddess, the deity of Kalighat in Kolkata, is Kali, darkness infinite. As a color, for those who know Kali, the color dark is her color. It is the color of salvation. Why then should states of mind paralleling the denial of ocular sight be thought of as dark and not as bright? This is a question in physics. Because when things are pretty and bright, we see our way around. When they are not pretty and bright, we are lost. And most often, or more often than not, things in life are not pretty. And more often than not, we are lost in the safety lockers of life. Lost and found is a shelf which is very bereft. Its minder so unemployed as to be most likely reading Harry Potter in her lonely seat. But the spaces of the world of loss are full, chock full. Its minder is life. And so, lead kindly light. Cardinal Newman's great hymn says, and so it should. Lead us from loss to whatever is the opposite of loss, finding, discovering, recovering, retrieving, keeping, and keeping so as not to lose ever. In our age of dangers so dreadful that we dare not believe that the dangers exist, made by man so greedy, so vengeful, and full of angers gathering in the sky and on our surfaces by the way we have heated up our earth, and of scarcities among plentifulness and of plenitude amongst misery, in that darkness of contrasts, let us also say, lead us kindly night to see what treasures lie in your dark bosom, so bright. Robert Lee Frost has this poem, Acquainted with the Night. Many here would know the poem well. At first glance, like Twinkle, Twinkle, it is an unremarkable work. But there is something in that poem, Acquainted with the Night, that makes you want to read it over and over again. And when you do see that everything about it, from its seeming ordinariness to its inner extraordinariness, lies in that one word, night. darkness, an inner darkness, illuminates the poem. Can darkness illuminate? Is that not a contradiction? Is that not an oxymoron? How can darkness illuminate? But there it is. So it is. Frost's biographers tell us that there was deep darkness in his life. His other famous poem, Stopping by Woods on a Snowy Evening, is also set in failing light. In fact, in what he calls the darkest evening of the year. And in woods that are, at any time of the day or year, dark and deep. What Frost's night and his woods mean beyond their literal meaning, only Frost knew, and perhaps his horse knew. But who knows what meaning the animal world makes easily and effortlessly of that which baffles us humans. Harivansh Rai Bachchan, the great Hindi poet, has translated Frost's Stopping by Woods into Hindi. He has translated dark and deep as Gahana Saghana, which captures like dark descending after the sun has set, the inky density of those lonely woods. 13 years older than Frost, the poet, painter, philosopher, Rabindranath Tagore, whose self-portrait is what you are seeing just now, kept in his works an everlasting acquaintance with the night and with the celestials. His extraordinary poem in his native Bangla, beginning with Nibira Ghana Adhare, Joleche Dhrubotara, has been translated by Kshitish Roy. Its opening line means, in the deep of the darkness shines the guiding star. Nibira Ghana Adhare, Joleche Dhrubotara. Tagore has darkness or the night appearing in his works in all its moods, tints and hues. As with Frost, Tagore's home life had been scorched by tragedies, sorrows and depression. There is nobody whose life has been untouched by sorrows, tragedies and depression. There is nobody who is not in fear of sorrow. Like Frost again, Tagore was no stranger to depression. Tagore was troubled and soothed by his solitariness. He saw that state in terms of a bird in the dark. One of his poems called Bad Times, that is the name, that is the title, Bad Times, has this image. Earth's face is hidden in a veil of dark. Yet and yet, O my bird in the dark, yet fly on. Fear not, nor look to ties of love. Hope not, for hope is full of guile. And yet, my bird in the dark, fly on. What was Tagore's bird in the dark about? Another self-portrait by Tagore. What was he saying through that image? Different things, one may be sure, at different points of time. But one thing overarchingly, and that may be summarized like this: it is the common lot of human beings to be alone, lonely, even in a crowd. In fact, especially in a crowd, one is lonely. And when alone, one can brood, like Jane Taylor's Violet, or one can discover the muse within us, which wants to, needs to speak out, no matter if no one listens. In fact, better if no one listens. Tagore's muse had many things to say, things which a clinical psychoanalyst might say come from prolonged intellectual isolation, and which a historian would say come from the great conflicts that a sensitive mind would experience in the colonial era. They may not be wrong. Be that as it may, what his poems say seem to me to be something like this. This is what I think he says. I listen to the still voice within. You may too. And that voice tells me to be myself, but not ostentatiously so, not making a statement, certainly not from a pulpit. What it tells me is mine. What it tells you would be yours, and somewhere it would be ours, not in a forced unity, but in a natural concordance. There, it tells us, quoting Tagore, Be not ashamed to stand before the proud and the powerful with your white robe of simpleness. These are Tagore's words. Let your crown be of humility, your freedom the freedom of the soul. Know that what is huge is not great, and pride is not everlasting. In those words, Tagore described his contemporary, one with whom he agreed and disagreed, respected so much as to criticize and correct, M.K. Gandhi. Gandhi was unashamed to stand before the proud and the powerful in the white garment of simplicity, humility and freedom, and yet in a way that made the huge look not so great and the proud look very temporary. On a third continent, other than Asia and Europe, in South Africa in 1893, young Mohandas was a practicing barrister. The episode of his having been hurled out of his first-class train compartment by white railway officials is well known, and I will not recount it. But I must share my experience of relating that episode to my 6-year-old granddaughter. After I described the scene of his being thrown out, she said, "Was he hurt?" I said, "No, not physically so much, because he does not say he was hurt, but he thought about it all very deep and long." "What did he say?" I said, "What did he say to the men who threw him out? We do not know, because he has not written what he said. But perhaps he said," and then I wondered, can I make up something which Gandhi said? Would it be right to just concoct a reply by Gandhi? No, that would be terrible. I would not have his thought, I would not have his language, I would not have his moral fervor, I would not have his permission. But then, can I deny an answer to a child? So I did improvise. I improvised an answer which may be called inferential internal evidence. I said to her, "Now look, baby, as the train went off, chuk, 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 he got up and shook his finger at them and said, 'Naughty, naughty, naughty, don't do this to anyone ever again, okay?'" She seemed quite pleased with that answer. Honesty sometimes needs art. Art sometimes needs honesty to work for a child. Gandhi used to walk beside President Kruger's dwelling in Pretoria routinely without any hindrance. That is a statue of Gandhi in Johannesburg, as Gandhi looked when he was in South Africa. One day, he was rudely pushed and kicked down onto the street by a presidential patrol. Mr. Coates, an English Quaker, who happened to see this, rushed to him and, saying he was most sorry, and as one who had seen it all, offered to report the deed as a witness. "You need not be sorry," Gandhi said to Coates. "What does the poor man know? All colored people are the same to him." And Gandhi then writes that Coates spoke to the guard, who came up to Gandhi and apologized. And of this Gandhi writes, "There was no need. I had already forgiven him." In 1908, when Gandhi had managed, against some odds, to secure a compromise agreement with South Africa's Minister for the Interior, Jan Smuts, some Indians were angered. They did not like the compromise. One of them, Mir Alam, went a step further. On the day fixed for a certain voluntary act on fingerprints, as Gandhi was proceeding to the venue to give his fingerprints, Mir Alam hit Gandhi on the head with a cudgel. He may well have thought, in fact, that he had killed him. Gandhi, on returning to consciousness, asked where Mir Alam was, and on being told he and some others had been arrested, Gandhi said they should be released. A Baptist minister and friend and biographer of Gandhi, J.J. Doak, then took Gandhi to his home nearby. Doctors advised that Gandhi should remain still, but Gandhi, barely able to speak, asked for the finger impressions office to send someone to the Doak home for taking those compromise impressions. And he then asked Doak if his little daughter, but no, why should I try to describe this? Let me quote Gandhi directly. Gandhi writes, he asked, little Olive should sing for me my favorite hymn, Lead Kindly Light. Mr. Doak called Olive by signs and asked her to stand at the door and sing the hymn in a low voice. The whole scene, Gandhi says, passes before my eyes as I dictate this, and the melodious voice of little Olive reverberates in my ears. Something very simple, very slight happened 100 years ago. World War I was on at the time. Draconian restrictions had been imposed on the people of India by the British government. 10 days from today, today is the second, 10 days from today is the exact centenary of the occurrence of that simple thing. What was that? It was a tiny letter, like a tiny star, written on April 12, 1919, by Tagore to Gandhi, who by then had returned to India and was at the head of a new government for freedom. Tagore's letter was about what he called a great gift of freedom, India's opportunity for winning it. Tagore said, the great gift of freedom will come to her when she can prove that she is morally superior to the people who rule her by their right of conquest. She must willingly accept her penance of suffering, the suffering which is the crown of the great. Tagore ended the letter as a poet would with a verse. He said, give me the faith of the life in death, the faith of the victory in defeat, of the power hidden in the frailness of beauty, of the dignity of pain that accepts hurt but disdains to return it. One day, no more than one day after he wrote that letter, on April 13, 1919, Sikhs, Hindus, and some Muslims as well gathered in Jallianwala Bagh, Amritsar, Punjab, for a festival that marks the Sikh New Year. There was a curb in position on public meetings, demonstrations. This particular meeting was not in defiance of the curb, but in a kind of indifference to it. Troops under the command of Colonel Reginald Dyer entered the garden. Reginald Dyer. They blocked the main entrance, took up position on a raised bank, and on General Dyer's orders, he became general accidentally. He was colonel then. And on his orders, fired on the crowd, non-stop, for some 10 minutes that were an eternity. They stopped firing only when the ammunition supply was exhausted. This was bloodthirst. Official sources gave a figure of 379 dead, with approximately 1,100 wounded. In those 10 minutes, Amritsar became India. An India outraged, bloodied, but made amazingly and unprecedentedly resolute. Tagore was, at the time of the mowing down of these men and women and children, Sir Rabindranath. And he had been a Nobel laureate for literature for 6 years. On May 30, 1919, Tagore picked up his pen, this time not just the pen of a Nobel laureate, but that of a knight of the British Empire, to write a letter to the Viceroy. News of the sufferings, he wrote, had trickled through the gagged violence, the gagging silence, reaching every corner of India. And then he said, the time has come when badges of honor make our shame glaring in their incongruous context of humiliation. And I, for my part, wish to stand, shorn of all special distinctions, by the side of my countrymen, who for their so-called insignificance are liable to suffer a degradation not fit for human beings. And he asked of the Viceroy, relieve me of the title of knighthood. And so, this year, which marks the centenary of the massacre of innocents by imperial greed, colonial hubris, and civilizational blindness, is also the centenary in India of light in the midst of darkness. An appropriate commemoration is being planned of that incinerating experience to help present generations understand the brutality and the futility of that arrogance. This is as it should be. Photographs of the episode are to travel the globe. This is again as it should be. Some have asked for an apology to come this year from Britain. A good memory is not the one that remembers wrongs done and seeks to avenge them, but that which remembers to not bear corrosive grudges and not nurse abrasive resentments. The great martyrs of Jallianwala Bagh beckon this generation to give much more than a retrospective apology. They beckon us, all of us, including India and Indians, Pakistan and Pakistanis, Bangladesh and Bangladeshis, Myanmar and Myanmaris, not just Britain, to look ahead, not at the past, and give human freedom respect, human beings dignity, human rights recognition. Looking around them at those slain, Hindu with Dalit among them, Sikh and Muslims, the martyrs of Jallianwala would want introspection, correction, and atonement from those on the Indian subcontinent and beyond its boundaries who today foment division, discord, disunity, and kill. A statue of Mahatma Gandhi, sculpted by the master sculptor Philip Jackson, stands at Parliament Square in London. It was put up there 4 years ago by the amazing initiative of some individuals, notably Meghna Desai, with the positive and active participation of Her Majesty's government. Gandhi stands there beside Lincoln, Churchill, Smuts, Mandela, exactly as Tagore said, with utter faith in goodness, unabashed before the arrogance that scoffs at the power of spirit. There is, in the placing of that statue there right next to Parliament House, an act of atonement. One look at Gandhi's eyes on that statue, and you can see what Gandhi wants for India, the India for whose freedom and for whose greatness he fought for, gave his life for. He wants the world's respect for the downtrodden and oppressed everywhere. And as he stands there and stands in history, I believe Gandhi wants to deserve, not demand, respect. And to get that respect, not at gunpoint, but from a thinking heart and feeling mind that knows the history of rights wronged. Today, few leaders speak in terms of reconciliation. Many more do in terms of revenge. The 3 V's that are in vogue today are vengeance, vanquishing, and victory. Vocal voices endorse retaliation. Huge voices endorse huge retaliation. They seem to think and suggest that reconciliation is a weak philosophy. Can, they ask, reconciliation, mediation work against terror? I will not say in some foolhardy way, yes, reconciliation, compromise can work against terror. I will not say that because I do not know that to be the case. But I will ask, have vengeance and retaliation worked to still violence and terror and hatred? They have not. To quote Jane Taylor again, when the sun shines nothing upon, then small stars twinkle. On March 15 this year, Fareed Ahmed, a 59-year-old Bangladesh immigrant in New Zealand, lost his wife Husna in the church, Christ Church, massacre. When the shooting started in the women and children section of the Al-Nur Mosque, she helped several escape to a safe garden. And then she came back to the zone of fire to check on her husband Farid, who was wheelchair bound, having been hit by a drunk driver in 1998. She helped him to leave as well, but within moments of that, one of the terrorists' bullets felled her. A shaken yet calm Farid said, after what must have been the deepest, darkest, and yet illuminated reflection about the white supremacist, he said, "The best thing is forgiveness." I cannot believe that anybody could have said this, and yet that is exactly what happened. He said, "The best thing is forgiveness." I tell him he has great potential to be a generous person, to be a kind person, to be a person who would be a great civilian one day. Grandmother of the Christchurch murderer, Mary Fitzgerald, said, "We are all gobsmacked." Gobsmacked. I had not heard that phrase before. My English belongs to an earlier generation. To what department of English does gobsmacked belong? To slang? To parallel English? I do not know. But what does it matter? It said everything. The phrase belongs to the vocabulary of true shock, a grandmother's shock, languageless, comprehensionless, guileless. And then she went on to say that she was shattered. That's the word, she said. Shattered. Farid and Fitzgerald, shattered, are light glowing in the midst of darkness. When New Zealand's Prime Minister said of the slain, "They are us," she did not say they are one of us, they are like us. She said, "They are us." And of the slayer, she said, "He is not us." She received, in my mind, at that instant, the equivalent of the Nobel Peace Prize. All of Chief Albert Luthuli, the Dalai Lama, Mother Teresa, fluxed into Jacinda Ardern. And the goddess Kali too, in her black veil of mourning, but in her radiating light of care, she became light in the midst of darkness. To my mind, Jacinda Ardern has already got the Nobel Peace Prize of 2019. She has shown the weakness of bullets and the strength of faith, the screaming hollowness of violence and the calm fullness of peace in the very eye of ballistics. Dubai's great Burj Khalifa, projecting the image of Jacinda Ardern in response to Christchurch, speaks of light in darkness. Friends, just want to say, we have had war, we've had bombs. Tagore used the phrase idea of India, and he said the idea of India is against the consciousness of the separateness of one's own people from others. And then he said something which had gone into the mind of, I think, in some way, in the mind of Robert Oppenheimer. When Robert Oppenheimer said, "I am become death," after the Trinity test. After the Trinity test, he said, quoting the Gita, "I am become death." Can you imagine what must have been going through his mind at that point? But Kenneth Bainbridge, the American physicist who was helping him, said something beyond what Oppenheimer said. Oppenheimer quoted the Gita. Bainbridge did not quote the Gita. He quoted alternative language. He said something which may be politically incorrect today, but I will say it because he said it in the heat of that moment. He said, I will elide one word in what he said, but you can fill in the word. He said, after seeing his own action in the shape of the test, he said, now we are all sons of. I see 5 dangers before us. 1, the real prospect, more real and more dangerous for not being spoken about, of error and terror, using the world's arsenals of bacteriological, chemical, and nuclear weapons to blackmail humanity. Lord Martin Rees's book, The Last Century, tells us how real this danger is. And it is becoming all too clear that for every Osama bin Laden killed, 10 take his place, and in the opposite camp no less than in his own. Witness Christchurch. 2, the deployment by states around the world of sinister and subtle means of surveillance and subversion to undermine human privacy, human freedom and human dignity, and to advance supremacist agendas for self-perpetuation and self-aggrandizement. Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, Papa Doc Duvalier, Augusto Pinochet, Saddam Hussein did all that they did openly. But today, wars do not have to be declared or waged. They just have to be won noiselessly. 3, the rise of corporate hegemonies, of techno-commercial behemoths that are propelling growth and prosperity in sections of the world while leaving huge swathes of humanity in distress so dire as to leave them frantic. That state of mind, being frantic, is fertile ground for violent ideologies and violent options. The problem becomes acute because in countries like India, rich exploitable minerals lie beneath Indian forests in which tribals dwell, commercially driven, high investment and water-using agriculture is a real danger. Many peasants, many of them Dalit, have actually staggered into suicide. 4, the grim reality of us, the Earth's dominant species, depleting with rapacity that very Earth's ability to create and sustain life. Great environmentalists, ecologists and writers ring alarm bells, but is there a single political leader in the world today saying halt to the despoliation of the environment, to the mutilation of our land, the pollution of our air, and the sucking up and drying up of water? Halt. The USA and India, the world's democracy leaders, can be the world's leader in alerting it to the madness of letting this degradation, disfiguring destruction happen, alerting it to the dangers of what Amitav Ghosh has called the great derangement. 5, and finally, the most important danger is the drowning in our times, the drowning in our world of the voice of conscience, the voice of Tagore and of Gandhi, by the noises of arrogant power, technological, commercial, militaristic, and political. This voice of conscience tells us to not criminalize any race, an old-fashioned term which I use here to stress the fact that the world today is more racist than ever before. To not hold a whole people or a whole religion, a whole culture responsible for the brutality of some among them. To not discriminate, disadvantage, or deny anyone for a belief held in the searing honesty of her individuality. Friends, we have amazingly, and I should say miraculously among us, His Holiness. After this, I don't trust His Holiness, the Dalai Lama, and His Holiness, Pope Francis. Then these two men of conscience, there can be no greater teacher. But who is listening to them? Am I listening to them? Not really. In my mind, I curse and I swear at those who are hurting our planet and abusing human rights. I am being an agent of anger, of frustration myself, but I am not being an agent of change. I am not being change. Tagore and Gandhi, both sons of the East, showed the way. The Magi, it is said, were three. One of them, Caspar, being, it is said, Indian. That may or may not have been the case. But beside these three is a fourth, no Magi, but just a wayfarer who joins them in their journey. And that fourth can be, has to be, none other than each one of us, looking for, fumblingly, stumblingly, managing to find the way with the help of celestial light, that hope for a world sinning against the light which refuses to go out, that hope which can make an old man say to a little girl asking him, is the world a good place or a bad place? It is a world that can be a very